I was doing some research on some recent Fish Eater Friday questions, and I was in a website looking up a quote. I was too lazy to go into the computer and find it. It's sometimes easier to go to the internet and find it. Plus, you run across things, and one of the people, he just commenting saying on the papal elections that have occurred, other than the ones amongst the anti-church in Rome, the conciliar church, and he just simply said, well, the laity can't elect a pope. He just threw that out there. And he threw out some other things about a few of the opinions. And I got to thinking, what should we think of his objection, or his statement? Part of his objection is that, well, we haven't exhausted all of the other possibilities. And so I got to thinking. Years ago, I was reading some stuff from Veritas, the early days back in the 70s. Someone had some copies of Veritas, which was a publication. It would be a Sede Vacantis, of course, and they had translated some of Father Sain's writing, talking about papal election. One of the things Father Sain's did in the very early 70s is he went to Rome. He looked up the conservative cardinals. Now, we're talking early 70s. These men were actually really validly appointed cardinals by Pope Pius XII. He looked some of them up, like a Siri. Not sure if he looked up Ottaviani. He could have been dead by then. I'm not. Whatever. He mentioned some names, as I recall. And he said, trying to get them to do something to end the vacancy. Trying to convince them of the vacancy, trying to get them to do something to end the vacancy. Now, my personal opinion is they had resigned as cardinals from their participation in Vatican II. But even granted that, they could have acted, in my opinion, as well, because they had not been declared and excommunicated as heretics, and they could recant, and the fact that they would have at least had a moral, in the eyes of the people, position. Let's say 10 cardinals. Let's say Father Sain's have gotten 10 cardinals together. They declare the papacy vacant, and they proceed immediately to elect a pope. A lot of people would have followed them, including possibly even Lefebvre, Peter Martigneau d'Intook, de Castromayer, and the crisis would not have been near as bad as it actually became. So the first level was tried in the early 70s without success. That's what Father Sain's reported. Remember, he died, I would say, actually June or probably July of 76. I know his Wikipedia page now reports him dying before May of 76, but how could I meet him in May of 76 if he was dead? But that's another story. So, the first level was tried. And Father Sain's was then going to the next step, trying to determine how we would proceed. And that's why he came to visit Archbishop Lefebvre in May of 1976 with Carmona and Zamora. They wanted to talk to Lefebvre about electing a pope. They thought anyone who calls Novus Ordo a bastard mass can't be all bad. Of course, he may not have made that statement by then, but he was at least standing up, apparently, for tradition. And that was apparently. Well, Sain's, Carmona, and Zamora were disappointed. They did not give up on electing a pope. Sain's died without it having been accomplished. Carmona and Zamora, as we know, in October of 81 were consecrated bishops. There's more to the story that people don't talk about. I have looked in Einsicht, and of course, I don't read German, but I tried to figure out the word conclave or election and use search engine on their PDF files, but I think they're picture PDF files, so maybe having trouble there. But Einsicht apparently did not discuss the election of a pope in print. However, May of 82, in Dallas, Texas, Carmona and Zamora were discussing the vacancy of the papacy and the election of a pope. It was common knowledge throughout traditionalism that Bishop Peter Martin Yodin took consecrated bishops to preserve the apostolic succession of holy orders until a pope could be elected. Now remember, he's quite an old man at the time, and one could at least consider that his course of action might be justifiable. So I thought about this in 87 after I became convinced of the necessity of a papal election. What if we do get a bishop, and when we first started, we did not know how long it would take to put together. Let's say we got an old bishop that joined with us, and he offered to ordain and consecrate me, and while the papal election be put together, because he was, old and he's afraid he might die. Would I accept it? And I decided, yes, I would accept ordination consecration. I would not exercise my orders until I submitted myself to the Pope after the election. I did work out exactly what I would do in that situation. So one could see that there would be an argument for consecrating bishops while a papal election was being assembled. We continue on. It did report on Bishop Peter Martin Yodin-Took's Wikipedia page that the January 83 meeting in Louisiana, I think in New Orleans, they discussed the election of a pope. There was a picture on there. I haven't checked the page lately. Bishop George Musey, who was consecrated in the Took line by Carmona, wrote an article and published it at the end of 83 talking about electing a pope as an open letter to Archbishop Lefebvre. Says, this is what we need to be getting about, is electing a pope. So it was being discussed. And this would be what you would call your next level. Bishop Took, Bishop Musey was writing Archbishop Lefebvre. They were talking about electing a pope. And that's the next level of the canonists and theologians, is what they would call a council, an imperfect council, is use at least one of the canonist terms, because it's not a general council, cannot decide matters of doctrine. It can only see to those things required to elect a pope, would be the bishops getting together. So that was tried, or at least discussed, from 82 until about 84. Then it died. Nothing happened. The bishops did not proceed. The Took bishops did not proceed to elect a pope. So that was exhausted. Now what's the next step according to the theologians and canonists? They say that the election of a pope ultimately devolves on the universal church. So the church herself will always have the means to elect a pope in an extraordinary situation. So we've gone through the first step, would be the remaining cardinals appointed by Pius XII. They were approached in the early 70s and refused. Now we have the traditionalist bishops. Archbishop Lefebvre was contacted. Bishop Took was contacted. I do not know about Bishop de Castro-Mayer, whether he was contacted or not. But, I mean, this was common knowledge. We do know that Bishop de Castro-Mayer was familiar with the Took consecration because he referred now Bishop Sanborn, who was then Father Sanborn, and one of my classmates from Econ, John Parrott, who was there probably to translate, because he knew de Castro-Mayer. He'd been in the TFB, had been to Brazil. He knew the language. Sanborn and Parrott went to see de Castro-Mayer. Parrott, because he got crossways with the Society of St. Pius X in some manner, was dismissed as subdeacon, and he's looking for ordination. And Sanborn is saying, where are we going to send men to ordain them? And that's when de Castro-Mayer told him, well, go to Gerard, that is to Bishop Gerard de Laurier. So de Castro-Mayer was familiar with Bishop Gerard de Laurier. I would imagine he was familiar also with Bishops Moises Carmona and Adolfo Zamora. And I would imagine the way information got around traditionalism, even back before the internet, he knew about the campaign to elect a pope. So the second level was tried. And in fact, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre had a priest looking into the election of a pope in 87, 88, because in 88, a friend of mine, I had co-authored a set of articles on the election of a pope, and a friend of mine contacted me, said he was approached by this priest wanting more information. He says, should I give him, what should I give him? I said, give him everything. This is a matter of the church. We're hiding nothing about the election of a pope. If they want it, give them everything I've got. So Lefebvre was looking into it in 88. Well, you don't look into election of a pope unless you're at least considering declaring John Paul II not pope. So the bishops failed. And when I say the bishops failed, de Castromayer, Nieuwendyk, Lefebvre were at one time Catholic bishops. The bishops consecrated by them, I do not consider as Catholic bishops. Valid? Yes. But as Catholic bishops, no, because they were not duly appointed in the proper manner. The only reason for consecrating a bishop during a prolonged vacancy, there are actually two reasons. One would be to fill a vacant diocese if you're competent, like happened during the Second Lancus Interregnum, and it's reported on Sedevacantists' websites. They use it to justify the consecration of bishops. It does not apply to them. What happened at that time, the canons of the cathedral would elect a successor to the dead bishop and send his name to the Pope for approval. Well, when the vacancy carried on 1 year, 2 years, finally they said, we're not waiting any longer. And they went ahead to the consecration of the bishop without the papal permission because there was no pope to give it. The pope subsequently approved that. That does not authorize the consecration of sacramental bishops, as I'm discussing in a Fish Eater Friday video. They were consecrating bishops to fill a vacancy when they had all the right to elect, save one thing, the papal permission. They went through all the formalities without the papal permission because it was impossible to get. The other reason, during the prolonged vacancy of the papacy, would be to preserve apostolicity of orders until a pope could be elected. That bishop would not ordain priests. He would not confirm, because he's not authorized to do that because he's not a diocesan bishop. He would merely be a bishop, and when he submits himself to the Pope, says, I'm a bishop to ordain and consecrate you should you need it. And the Pope would then decide where to appoint this bishop to. So we now have the cardinals and the bishops have all failed. So what's the next line of defense? Is the universal church. Now how does the universal church act? What we did, and there were several of us, myself, Dr. Benjamin Franklin Dryden, Mr. Thomas Hempel, Daniel Leonardi, Kenneth Mock came in closer to the time of the election, Patrick Henry down in Safford, Arizona, who was a CMRI priest and quit functioning as a priest because he found traditionalism was not Catholic and he should not function. It must be admired for that at least. We were all spreading this information about electing a pope in order to convene an election. Teresa Stanfield-Benz and myself co-authored. She wrote 2/3, I wrote 1/3, Will the Catholic Church Survive the 20th Century? Remember, she reported on her website a couple of years ago, she wrote 2/3 of the book, and I went out and did the math. She was within a page or 2 pages of being absolutely correct, which, I mean, that's close enough for me. That book was sent worldwide to every Sedevacantist organization we could find an address for, and we had Radical Jansky's Traditionalist Catholic Directory, which listed all of them worldwide. It went to every Sedevacantist organization and to any other Sedevacantist we could find to summon election. It went to every bishop. Every took bishop. Bishop Vesalius, Bishop Carmona. I forget his name, a bishop in Japan. Several in Europe. I'm not sure if we sent one to Bishop Musey because we couldn't find an address from him because he was on his deathbed. He might even have been dead at the time. But the Sedevacantists, every one of them, we made what would be considered a reasonable effort. In fact, we went overboard trying to contact them. We sent books, we sent summonses to the election, we summoned to the election, we convened the election, we held the election. Because the law of the church is quite clear. Of a body that is qualified to elect, those that actually show up elect. And the rest, by not showing up, are giving up their right to vote by their failure or refusal to come. And so we proceed as a universal church, 6 people. There have been other elections of 6 people. Pope Innocent II was elected by 6 people. At least 5 popes, one person claims 8, were elected by one person. The 5 I know of, 4 by an emperor, 1 by an empress. They appointed the pope. None of those elections were doubted, although they were totally canonically irregular. Nothing invalidates a papal election except the election of a woman or a heretic or an unbaptized person. That's the only 3 things that can invalidate election. Woman, heretic, unbaptized. You elect a baptized man, he is pope. Now, I was elected. Others consider this precedent to be proper. Laity and took clergy and some other independent priests had found ordination through another means, including Victor von Pence in 1994 held an election in Assisi, Italy. Victor von Pence was elected as pope, eventually accepted. They elected him, I forget how many times. He took the name of Linus II. He is now virtually resigned. You can't find him anymore because I would guess him to be about my age, possibly even younger, from what little I know about him, because he was in seminary in Winona at one point. He was eventually ordained in the Ukrainian Rite, and I don't know where. He went to obtain ordination. He did find ordination. 1998, Father Lucian Pulvermacher got together a group of lay people, and they held a papal election in 1998. The phone-in election, which that's against canon law. To have an election, you all must be physically present. So 2 other groups considered it. Down in South America, I'm not sure who held that election. A few years ago, an election was held. That pope died. Successor elected. He died. Over a short period of time, another man was elected as pope who resigned into a void. And that group is apparently dissipated, best I can find out. So, it convinced 4 different groups of people to elect a pope. Why? Because sede vacantes end. Sede vacantes, it's time for you to realize the vacancy has been ended. Join with us to restore the church. We agree on the same doctrine, with the exception of the matter of sacramental priests and bishops. The position of those priests and bishops is heretical. I've discussed that in the Fish Eater Friday video. We can go into more detail and get out the theology books, but sacramental priests and bishops wrong, but we can get that aside. Sacramental priests and bishops, you've been misled. Time for you to return to the Catholic Church and to the Pope. We agree on the substantials. It's time for us to unite to save souls, because we save souls by restoring the hierarchy. We have a Pope. We have a bishop. The bishop that ordained and consecrated me. We have priests joining with us. We have others in Europe. A patriarch, bishop, and priests joining with us as Pope Michael to work for the salvation of the church. It's time for you to join with us. Because the universal conversion is going to come whether you join or not. If you don't join, there's two ways for God to solve this problem. You convert or you die. I don't want your death. God does not desire the death of the sinner, and neither do I. Rather, what does he say? That he be converted and live. And so, yes, the laity can elect a pope. The laity did elect a pope July 16, 1990. We are the pope. We want to work with you as the ultimate form of Catholic action to bring about the universal conversion. God's calling you. What is your answer?